Welcome to The Golden Shadow. My name is Alyssa Polizzi.
And I'm Arran Rogerson.
Next week, Jungian analyst Dr. John Beebe will be joining us as our guest for the Shadow Play speaker series at the STOA. Dr. Beebe is well known for his work in Jungian typology, expanding the theory to include a personality model that explores all 8 functions of consciousness and archetypal associations for each of them.
Yeah, so normally we think of personality types like the MBTI with 4 functions, like the INFJ or the ESFP. Usually there's 4 functions. His 8 function model adds the 4 functions that are missing from the MBTI.
Where are those 4 other ones?
Right, and if you don't know what we're talking about, then we're going to get into it a little bit with this episode, but he has an 8 function model that has 4 conscious functions. Would that be the right way to phrase it? Or superior functions that are on top.
Yeah, there's like the classic 4 that you'll see arranged in like the profiles of MBTI. They call those like egosyntonic, so those that we associate with, even the ones that are at the lowest or feel most inferior, still feel like us.
Okay.
It's synchronous to our being. But then there's 4 other functions. And the big question that I think a lot of people in the typology community is, do we interact with those 4? Some people pay attention to them, some don't. And Beebe, with his work over decades, really, of being an analyst and having a clinical practice, recognize that those 4 other missing functions seem to also be within conscious grasp, yet ultimately are deeply in shadow.
Right. And he also associates an archetype with each of the 8 functions, right? And so like the superior function is the hero.
Or the heroine.
The secondary function or auxiliary function is like the good parent.
Yeah, like mother or father.
And then it's...
The puer, puella, the child, eternal child for the third. And then the inferior function is carried by the anima or the animus.
Right.
So the idea is, especially from a Jungian point of view, is that reality is shaped by archetypal structures. So why wouldn't our conscious functions and unconscious functions also be riding that same archetypal wave? And as he began to recognize these patterns, he saw that they carried a certain energy to them. Like an individual's dominant or inferior function always carries that sense of a lot of confidence, of rushing into battle, of feeling like they know how to handle things. It has that heroic, open, courageous attitude.
Yeah.
And so he applied that archetype of the hero to the inferior or to the superior function, and he did that for all 8 of them. So it's a really interesting model that expands and really looks at consciousness holistically compared to, say, Myers-Briggs, which is just looking at 4 functions, and even then is sort of focusing on maybe observable behaviors and not so much about development of one's conscious potential.
Yeah, so Dr. Beebe will be coming to the STOA where he will speak with us. That's going to be Wednesday, February 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can RSVP at thestoa.ca. It's a free event. And so this episode, in preparation for talking to Dr. Beebe, we're going to try and round out the typology episodes. So we've already done thinking and feeling.
Yeah, episode 3.
And we did
Introversion, Extroversion.
Right.
Episode
couldn't remember
15.
And now we are going to attempt to discuss sensing versus intuition.
Yeah. This is the last axis of the typological structure. And this one is often called the perceiving axis, or from classic Jungian literature, the irrational axis. And, you know, depending on how you look at it, you know, this is just an additional axis of how we orient to reality. Some say it's how we perceive or take in information, but it has a distinctly different dynamic and energy compared to thinking and feeling. And sensation and intuition exist as opposing opposites, you might say. They're different poles on this axis. And so they're both interrelated. They balance each other out, yet at the same time they oppose each other.
Right. So it's a dichotomy, and we use dichotomies like crazy because it's how we can frame reality and make sense of it, right? Dualisms are always reductive because nothing is ever just two things, but we use dualisms to make sense of the world. And so they're very useful, even if they're not exhaustive. So sensing and intuition is a dualism, but it's not just one or the other.
True.
There's lots of room in between these two extremes, and the two extremes themselves are even hard to really nail down as far as this is obviously sensing or this is obviously intuition. We can really isolate those concepts and make sense of them. It's like, this is still like, it's still very weird territory.
Yes.
And it's something that Alyssa and I have talked a lot about as far as topics that we've covered in the podcast. Typology is something that we've discussed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And we still argue a lot about the definitions, what the words mean. I'm always trying to kind of fit typology into my own framework of philosophy and psychology. And sometimes I feel like it doesn't fit very well. So it's hard for us to come to an agreement sometimes about what we mean by sensing and what we mean by intuition. But hopefully this episode will be aimed at fleshing that out a little bit live on air, and maybe it'll devolve into an argument. Maybe we'll actually discover some things that we didn't realize previously due to this conversation.
Yeah. I don't know if we've said this on any of the typology episodes, maybe a bit on extroversion or introversion, but it's important to keep in mind that we have all of the functions, not even as we look at Dr. Beebe's model, which allows us to recognize all 8 functions at play, but even within the more limited models like MBTI, you're within consciousness of what you can really establish and cultivate. You have access to thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. It's just your order of preferences is different. So you're never just going to fully relate to being only a sensation type or only a thinking type. And if you think about it extremely simplistically like that, you will likely find yourself confused and constantly questioning, what's my type? Because I feel like this or I feel like that. The reality is we use all of the functions, and there's going to be an order, a hierarchy that your natural orientation to the world dictates how you pull those functions out of the unconscious. So you might prefer to have sensation at the top, which will naturally sort of suppress the intuitive function, but you also intuit. So don't get caught in that trap of thinking that you have to only relate to one or the other.
Right. There's also a nature-nurture interaction here. Yeah. So, it's hard to pin this down, of course, but like you probably were born a certain type in some regards. It's kind of strange to think about because we develop as we grow and we kind of become the people that we're meant to be over time. We're not born exactly the person that we're meant to be.
Oh, but the blueprint is there.
The blueprint's there.
Yes.
And we have to factor in that there is interaction with that blueprint from experience.
Yes.
So even if you are born in INTJ, for instance, it's possible that you might have certain functions that are deflated for whatever reason. Maybe you are traumatized. Maybe you're not around people who really encourage that function, or vice versa. Maybe you're in a family that really, really encourages thinking. They really want you to be a thinker and be rational.
Yes.
They are really into STEM and science, and they might be encouraging a way of interacting in the world that kind of suppresses your more feeling functions. That's possible. Yes. And so typology is tough, and everyone really, really wants to say like, this is who I am. This is my identity. And they want to look up the MBTI, charts, and it's like, ooh, Harry Potter. Okay, I am Ron Weasley. People like really want to know their identity. But it's important to understand that like it really isn't so cut and dry, and that part of discussing these ideas and part of taking a test online, if you want to take a test online, it's interesting. It provides you some insight, and it might be a good head start into figuring out who are you, what's your type. But it's important to remember that truly everyone is very unique.
Yes.
It's hard to really say that like you are just like every other INTJ in the world.
Yeah.
It's like,
no.
It's kind of tough.
Definitely not. one has to keep in mind that the types are expressing a inherent orientation to the world, a natural propensity that you have to move towards certain functional tools within your tool belt, but how those are expressed is highly dependent on the person themselves. So you'll never have two types that are truly the same. And that's why type profiles are ultimately kind of useless because it could totally throw you off. And you might find yourself really questioning what your type is because you looked online at this definition and then you looked online at another definition and they're all confusing and they're contradicting each other.
But it's like these are very, very different results.
Yes, yes. Okay, one other point before we move forward. When Jung started theorizing psychological types, there was a sense that to truly understand the process of individuation, you had to understand the psychology of consciousness. And psychological types was born out of a desire to understand why people orient to the world differently. Why does Adler, old psychoanalyst, look at neurosis this way? Why does Freud look at neurosis this way? Why do I, Carl Jung, look at it this way? There's these inherent differences that would cause clashes, that would have certain resonance. And that's because everyone's orienting to the world differently. And so if you're looking not just at communicating with others more efficiently or just in a more balanced way, but also in learning the language of your own psyche, psychological type starts to lay out that blueprint where you understand why you have that tendency to be motivated to do this, but not something else. So it's all about creating this greater understanding of that blueprint of your mind, but it's not meant to box you in. It's not meant to label you. It's meant to just illuminate what are the kind of moving pieces and also where is there opportunity for further development? How can you encourage that process of individuation by knowing how you work within the world?
So quick review, thinking and feeling. Thinking is sort of orienting oneself towards the world of ideas or concepts. It's kind of abstracting out of one's needs in order to get a more kind of objective view, more zoomed out view, sort of see the world as a place of objects as opposed to a place of meaning and needs. Feeling is more orienting oneself towards needs. It can be kind of have like a social orientation as well. It can involve being concerned about one's own needs, one's own kind of lower drives, but also other people's sort of lower drives. Like you might be more concerned as a feeling person with how someone is doing today, and you want to take care of them, and you're interested in what you can do to make them feel better. Whereas someone who is thinking towards the same person might be interested in working on a car with that person, or taking apart a certain news story and making sense of it, or trying to problem solve how they're feeling rather than just sort of take care of them.
Yeah, or relate to them. Yeah, thinking is tapping more into that logical framework, looking for accuracy within words and concepts and ideas, and really wanting to approach the world through that space, while feeling is much more about the values and what feels right to me or what feels right to the group. And so they exist in a type of harmony, but they also oppose each other. We went over extroversion, introversion.
Yeah.
And that's looking at attitudes towards the world, how the functions are further altered. So thinking has two versions, extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. Extroversion is about really how we relate to not just the outer world, but really like energy and behavior and motivation that moves outwards. And it's about recognizing this very extensive, rather than depth, we go for breadth. It's really kind of opening and taking in a lot of information, rather going extremely deep towards the inner world of introversion, where the energy moves inward. So you can kind of think of extroversion as flowing outward from the subject, from yourself out into the world, out to other people, to other systems, and introversion as flowing inward towards oneself.
Right. One way that I think is useful to think about extroversion and introversion is like borders. If you think of the self in some sense, the energetic self as having borders, the extroverted person's borders are more open. They're more in the flow with what's going on around them. They're more open to energy coming from the outside and changing the energy on the inside. So they'll kind of go with the flow more maybe, or they're more interested in what's going on in the outside world. Introverted might be the borders are a little more closed. So the energy is a little more self-contained. It doesn't need to go outside to figure out what's going on.
Yes.
Less likely to be in the flow of things and more likely to have like an inner flow that is sort of self-perpetuating. There's more of kind of like a self-referential aspect of being introverted where like these sort of patterns being recognized are more inner patterns and then, as opposed to patterns that are happening outside of you in the world. So again, it's hard to articulate these things, but that's a general idea. And we can fit sensing and intuition into that. It's difficult, but sensing and intuition, I think, is definitely the most difficult one. But sensing and intuition is, in some sense, in what way are you sort of perceiving reality? And there's sort of the way that I like to think of it is like it's a kind of dichotomy between concreteness, immediacy, the kind of here and now, or like the presence of like, this is here and now. I can feel the things around me. They're very concrete and material. That's sensing. And then intuition as being sort of looking deeper or looking beyond and seeing the patterns behind the things and being in the future or being in the past, maybe more so than being in the here and now. Kind of less being present and sort of dreaming or looking over the horizon or sort of off in some thought that you're having. And so we can think of it as kind of, or I like to think of it at least, as kind of an immediacy with sensing versus sort of like a depth or an etherealness or a kind of theoretical
it's
space
very abstract
of intuition.
It's an interesting question is to consider why these two exist on an axis and what's really going on that seem to be oppositional poles. And you could take, for example, someone looking at like a tree trunk or something like that, and sensation being concrete, being immediate, focusing on reality as it is going to take in all of the information of the tree trunk itself, the shape of the bark, the color, the texture of it. Does the tree seem to be thriving because, you can see little ants crawling on it, or is it showing like little indications of decay or some sort of sickness? Sensation is focusing on that practical, factual information, the colors, the sounds, the smells, often associated with what actually comes through physical stimuli and how that kind of grounds us in the present moment, or at least in the information that flows from the environment to us. And intuition is saying, here's a tree trunk, but what inspires, what images come to mind, what possibilities are generated when I see the tree trunk? It might be that you could build a house with it. It's not paying attention. Like, it knows it's a tree trunk, right? It's taking in that factual information, but it's kind of pushing that aside in service to some sort of image that's been gripped by the individual through that intuitive function that says, what's the possibility for this? Maybe they imagine the tree will grow and, flourish bigger and bigger. Or maybe you see that you could cut it down and create something with it. It's everything that's flowing from the object itself and all of the inherent potential that exists within the item. And that becomes ignited in the intuitive when they see really any object, person, etc.
Yeah. So like thinking and feeling, to me, the imagery, the visuals of that is sort of a altitude kind of thing, where it's like thinking is kind of high up, Like you're sort of operating from this very
Yeah.
high abstract place. Feeling is sort of operating from kind of like this lower gut space. And sensing and intuition, there's more of kind of like a depth and distance.
Yeah.
So instead of like
Yeah.
up and down, sensing and intuition kind of has this sort of horizontal or into feeling,
Yeah.
where it's like sensing is a little more close and proximal and here, and intuition is a little more deep beyond.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I think of it. I mean, that might or may not be useful to someone, but that's kind of what I see as the axes here.
Yeah. Yeah.
How deep are you looking into the world?
Yeah.
How much are you perceiving the patterns behind the
Right.
patterns?
Yes.
Behind the patterns. For intuition, how much are you looking at the potential of things? What will be?
Yes.
What could be?
Yes.
What is becoming?
Yes.
Whereas sensing is more kind of like what is.
Yeah. What is?
More focused on the facts. Like, don't give me any like theory. Like, give me the facts.
Right.
So there's a practicality to sensing.
Yes.
Versus a kind of a vision and I don't want to say curiosity, but a kind of dreaming that intuition has, where it is dreaming up things, it is dreaming up the world. Whereas sensing is kind of more practical, more thinking about what can I touch?
Yeah.
What can I see in front of me?
Yes.
If I can't touch it and I can't see it,
Right.
it might as well not exist.
Yes. Yes. That's like extreme sensation, but it's helpful sometimes to think in those extremes. Like sensation doesn't want to even entertain these ideas of intuition because there's nothing in reality that says that's true.
Yeah.
But that's why intuition can be so incredibly innovative, because the possibilities that an intuitive dreams up are often what shifts markets into totally new directions. It's what grows culture in areas that nobody thought was possible. It inspires potentials in individuals that otherwise might not been considered. At the same time, we have to stay grounded in reality, because intuition can fly way off the handle and be dancing in this dreamland and never come back down to earth to actually make it happen.
Right.
And that's why the two have to be in balance, or, something like balance.
Right. Again, that's why there's sort of a dichotomy, is because they
Yes.
balance each other out.
Yes, they do.
Right. If you go too far in either direction, you are losing a huge amount of the world and a huge amount of the understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Intuition, I think, also can kind of tie into like this more sort of mythological, symbolic kind of way of seeing the world.
Yes.
This is kind of abstract, but mythology in some sense is kind of, it's the narrative faculty, it's the story faculty, it's the way in which we sort of simulate what could be. Like when we're watching a movie, we're watching a modern myth of some kind, what it's playing upon, what it's activating within us is a faculty that simulates possible realities. If we perceive ourselves as like an avatar that could go in all these different directions in our life, intuition is doing that. It's sort of seeing what could be, how could I become, what could become in the outer world, where might things go? And so simulating the future, mythology plays on that. And it tells a story, and we enjoy the story because it's playing upon that simulating function.
Yeah.
So we can see how the intuitive might have a more kind of mythological, symbolic interaction with the world. They might see things and all this meaning and story and this vibrant light might be conjured up by seeing an object. And all of that is not material, right? It's like what's going on behind the object.
Yeah.
What is the spirit of the object, as opposed to the sensing person who's more. We have to be careful because we don't want to sound too pejorative with either one. But sensing might have less of a mythological relationship with things and more of a kind of materialistic, saying like there's nothing behind the object. Yeah, it's just an object. Yeah, there's nothing. When you see the cross, when you say the Christian cross, the sensing person might be. It's just two pieces of wood slapped together. Right. That's what it is. Yeah. But the intuitive might be like, but can't you see like the ways in which like reality is kind of a cross? It's sort of like an intersection. And like the story of Christ is something that gives this so much meaning. And you can almost picture Christ on the cross, even though it's just two pieces of wood.
Right.
And you can begin to understand what are the dichotomies in reality that intersect like this, perpendicular intersections within reality. What is the metaphysics of the cross? Like, there's all these things that could be happening with an intuitive. These are some like extreme illustrations, but you can understand how someone who is doing that, of like, whoa, look at all this stuff that's behind the cross. Look at all these things that are the cross represents. Think of the story behind the cross. You can see how that is powerful, but it could also just become something where it's like, snap back to reality.
Yes.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
you've lost your mind. You were like floating away into the cosmos.
Or reading into things in ways that are just, you know, you're just floating off constantly. And sensation brings you back to earth. And it can be extremely powerful because the immediacy of being able to interact with the environment for a sensation individual can make them so attuned that it's like they become one with the environment. This is sort of like a typical stereotype, but I think there's a lot of truth to it, that sensation individuals are like incredible athletes or really good artists who can like work with certain materials, or like artists who can actually like replicate things in an extremely lifelike way rather than maybe like a more abstract artist with a weird interpretation. So some of like the probably like most professional athletes are likely highly extroverted sensation types because their ability to take in the information of the immediate environment makes them so attuned to what's going on that they have incredible instincts, you know, their reflexes, their ability to move around a field to understand what's coming towards them gives them this incredible relationship to the environment, and also allows you to stay grounded in a way that you don't move too deep into that intuitive abstraction, and that you don't lose yourself in the realm of possibilities or in brainstorm after brainstorm after brainstorm, and instead actually get things done, materialize reality.
Right. There's also just being in touch with your body, being in touch with your sensations. Athletes, they really need to know their body well, and they need to understand when their instincts are pointing to something. If they're having like this feeling on the back of their neck, or they're kind of like sensing that there's this weakness in their knee, it's like all these things are happening with soccer players, you know, basketball players, where like they really, really need to be in touch with their own sensations. They have to pay attention to how they're feeling. They have to know whether they can make the jump, whether they can slide and make this kick, whether they can actually you know, sprint and make it to the goalpost in time.
Yeah, like taking in the opposing player, how far they are from the goal, like doing all of this like incredibly fast and then making a move.
Right. And so they're very much, they're observing the patterns of reality, but they're also very, very in touch with their sensations.
Yes.
The landscape of their sensations, the strange story of their sensations and what they're pointing to. So it makes sense that athletes are going to be very, very strong sensation types, but not without intuition, right? And that's the important idea here.
Yeah.
Is that they're also seeing the patterns behind the patterns behind the patterns. And if you can calculate somehow that there's going to be some crazy like 3 or 4 part play that's going to happen, you can kind of just see it in your mind. You're seeing this pattern play out, even though if you took a snapshot of the moment, you wouldn't see the play that's about to happen, but kind of seeing beyond, having that deep vision into the kind of trajectories that are transpiring in front of you.
Yeah. I think it's helpful for individuals to look up what the actual breakdowns of the function types are, and that you see that there is that dichotomy at play. So if you are an extroverted sensation type, that's your superior function. Immediately on the other side of that axis is your number 4 inferior, and that's introverted intuition. So they're opposing each other, and yet it's a part of that kind of top 4 functions that you use in everyday life. And you recognize that, yes, you have the preference of utilizing extroverted sensation, but behind the scenes, a little bit more unconsciously, you're also picking up on these implicit patterns. You're creating a system of understanding to know what's likely going to happen, so that kind of introverted intuition works in service of your extroverted sensation. So they don't work without each other. Same thing with thinking and feeling. You're going to have that axis and two functions of thinking and feeling that are in relationship together. So they are walking hand in hand.
Yeah. So maybe we could break down sensing and intuition into their functions.
Sure, yeah.
So extroversion and introversion are the attitudes that are going to orient these functions. So we could start with, what would be the most basic one to start with?
Start with extroverted sensation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So SE.
Yeah, SE is what you'll often
Extroverted
see
Sensation.
So we mentioned that like extroversion is about movement of energy towards the object or towards the outer world away from you. So extroverted sensation is looking at that very direct relationship with reality, taking in all of that sensory information as one is interacting with the environment. It's almost like you're gripped by the world as it presents itself. And that makes things incredibly real for you.
Yeah.
And it helps you focus on the practical. It helps you focus on what can actually materialize based on what's real, what's touchable, what is usable in this reality that is in front of you. There's no second guessing it. I can replicate it because here it is. I can take a photo and show it to you. There's no questioning that this existed. So that sense of experiencing a lot of immediate contact with the outer environment, that's where the extroversion comes in, taking in that information from outer reality.
Right. So the title, the label that we gave Extroverted Sensation is The Pragmatist. It's one of many titles I think we threw around.
It's like a working idea.
But I think it's useful to kind of have these labels to sort of make sense of like, what are we even talking about? So the pragmatist, the notion of extroverted sensation is someone maybe who has extroverted sensation as their primary function. They might be someone that you think of as being very practical. They're very concrete in the way they kind of engage with the world. They want facts. They want to see and touch what's going on. And because of that, they actually know how to navigate through a lot of practical environments very well.
Yeah.
They might be very handy. They might be interested in sort of managing their house well or their land well. They might be good in a restaurant or something like that where things are very practical. They're very hands-on. They're very sort of here and now. And so we can sort of think of extroverted sensation as a lot of what you are paying attention to and a lot of the way that you are oriented is kind of towards like things that are external to you, what is going on in the world around you. You're paying attention to the details of the materials of the objects. You're seeing the details of the trees. You're seeing the leaves and the twigs and the bark and the grass around it. And you kind of are really in touch with the way that things are moving around you, and you're very oriented in that way. As far as what your next move is going to be, you might be taking in a lot of your surroundings to plan your next move. You might be very in touch with the organization of the concrete world around you in order to decide what is happening here, what should happen to here, what could be improved. The problems maybe that you look to solve, like this is what needs to be solved, might be outside in a very concrete way right in front of you.
Yeah. We went on a hike recently with someone, a friend, well, I considered probably has a really strong extroverted sensation. I don't know for sure, but there's this tendency to be gripped by everything that we walked by.
Yeah.
Oh, look at the shade of the leaves on this tree. Oh, I wonder if it's this kind of pine or that kind of pine. Let's count the leaves because some have like a double leaf and some have a one. Look at the color of the rock just as like the sun's hitting it right here. It's like every moment is this almost like overwhelming taking in of information and physical stimulus that just fills you up. And I think that's a nice way to like picture what's happening with extroverted sensation. It's just this inpouring of all of that external information that's like igniting you in this way. And it's exciting. Extroverted sensation makes you, I think, have this real sense of aliveness, real depth of connection to the environment that you're interacting with, and also like picking up on things that most other people are not paying attention to. No one really sees reality as accurately, quote unquote, as extroverted sensation does.
Yeah. And it's important to understand that if you are, let's say, a primary extroverted sensation type, that a lot of the way that you perceive the world is also how you perceive others perceive the world. So if you feel very oriented in a practical, concrete way towards things, and you feel really activated by what kind of trees are around me, and like what kind of rock is this, and what's the geography of this area, or what can I do around the house, or like what kind of projects are there to work on around the house or around the land I own. You might think that other people also feel that way, and that's an important part of this is your primary function. Not always, but often it can be sort of the way that you perceive what is valuable in the world and what others also think is valuable or should think is valuable.
Yeah.
So introverted sensation is next.
So introversion is less about going outward to understand and going inward. The energy flows towards the subject, towards the person's experience or internal system. So we're still dealing with practical reality, but introverted sensation is interesting because what is in the environment evokes what was. And what that means is that the introverted sensation type is going to pick up, say, that tree in the environment, and it's going to recall an image at a different time in their life where they saw a tree like that. So you're still picking up on sensory information, the color, the way the sun is, the shape of the tree, but it's going to recall to you in that internal system of sensation, data, and facts, all of those experiences you had that were similar to it. So introverted sensation is going incredibly deeply to almost fact check sometimes what is reality based on what reality was before.
Right. So the label that we slapped on this one is the routinist.
Yeah.
And again, this is not an exhaustive label, but I think like it helps to kind of think about like what kind of person is an introverted sensation type. Someone who likes routine, someone who can be kind of conservative in some sense, just in the notion of wanting things to kind of not change too much.
Yeah, or not too drastically.
Yeah, not seeing any reason to fix things that aren't broken. Like it's like things are fine the way they are. Why would you change them? I like my routine. Someone who is self-contained and kind of self-referential. So this idea of like bringing up sensations from the past, nostalgia, kind of liking things that you've already experienced, and sort of there's this kind of self-referential energy there of like, I like what I like. And why do I like it? Because I've experienced it already. And my sensations there are precious to me.
Yeah.
So I like feeling these sensations again and again and again. And maybe I don't want to go outside to find new sensations, outside metaphorically speaking or phenomenologically speaking. Maybe I don't want to pick up on what's going on around me to find that concrete or that's kind of sort of immediacy of physicality, of embodiedness, that like what's going on in me, these sensations I'm feeling now, those are enough. Those are fine. And so it might be someone who has a lot of nice things that they like. Maybe they collect things and they have like a nice collection. They have their house set up well in the way they really like it, and they have their routine, and they wake up every morning and they like have a certain meal and they like that meal, and they just have like their life is sort of organized in a way that feels good, and it gives them nice sensations, and they kind of like it that way.
Yeah, there are like these internal stored models that the introverted sensation type is referring back to, which gives them this level of like certainty and confidence of this is going to work. And I think because of that, they're incredibly reliable, or they can kind of get you out of a pickle by recalling what did work, rather than, someone who's maybe trying to change things or innovate things, and you're moving too quickly. Like the introverted sensation is what recalls us back to those senses of tradition, you might say, that are long held for a reason.
Right.
It's kind of this like historical function that we have inside of ourselves that allows us to reach deeply into the past, recognize what was true, what was real, what was concrete, what was practical at that time, and hold on to it even now in this moment.
Right. So extroversion, you kind of have this notion of spreading thin
Yeah.
in some sense, and that could mean very different things depending on the function. And introversion as being kind of more concentrated, more narrow, and more deep in your energy. So as you said, someone could be really reliable who's a sensing introverted type because they have like a tried and tested way of doing things, and they've done it and done it and done it and done it, and they know it works and it works for them, and they're very good at what they do in this way. But they might be kind of narrow in that, like if they're out of their comfort zone,
Yeah.
they might be useless all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, they've suddenly left the realm of familiarity.
Right.
They don't know how to adapt.
Yes.
They don't like to adapt.
Yes.
They don't want to be pushed to change. But with the thing they know, they're reliable.
Yeah.
They're on top of it.
I think SE, extroverted sensation, is much more adaptable because it's taking in everything in that present moment, that it can kind of maybe shift course, or it's not tied to so many things of the past that it's feeling stuck and doesn't know what to do. So that kind of shows you how SE can be more expansive or more adaptable in real time, while SI is going to go a little bit deeper into that storehouse of all of that sensory information that informs how to deal with the present reality.
Right. And again, this idea of if you are SI, that you're perceiving others as also being SI, or maybe you respect it when someone else is sort of behaving this way.
Yeah.
Like you'd understand why someone might like the routine. And we band together in liking our routine. And like, you don't want to push someone else to change because you wouldn't like that. So you kind of understand the ways in which other people might be less adaptable, or they might be kind of more deep into their lifestyle and the way they like things. And you respect that because that's how you feel. Isn't that how everyone feels?
Yeah.
So that's an important way to kind of understand people's value systems in some sense. It's just like, it's just the way they orient towards the world.
Yes.
It's what's real to them.
Yeah. It's going to be true for every function.
Yeah.
And we're probably always going to, unfortunately, assume other people are like us.
Yeah.
It's just not
Right.
true. But that's why typology is interesting and also helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Intuition. So that perception function through sensation is in some ways a little bit easier to understand because it's interacting with reality as it is. It's picking up on all of these things coming in through the physical stimuli. When Jung was writing psychological types and putting the theory to this, there seemed to be some pattern that showed that people were perceiving information, coming up with all of these possibilities, abstract ideas, creating patterns. And it was like, where is this coming from? It sure as hell isn't coming from this reality. It's not coming from like, the way the wind is moving or something like this. It's kind of unconscious in nature. And by that, they just basically mean question mark, where is it coming from? We don't know. Some realm of the unconscious is generating a vision, an idea, an abstract connection. So intuition, often when you look up the definition, is going to say that it's perception by way of the unconscious. And that's just to say that there's not an exact discernible line from this exact area to the vision or potential or intuition.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit murkier. And for this reason, intuition is a little mysterious.
Right. So extroverted intuition, the label, this one was hard, honestly. I have like 3 labels for it, but they are the surveyor, someone who is looking out across the land and kind of seeing like, what could this be? The speculator, someone who speculates about like, what could this be? What is this worth? What could it become? What is the potential here? And the visionary. And the visionary is good, but I don't like it because it has such a positive valence. And it's important, like none of these functions are good or bad. They have valences where if you are an extroverted intuition, you can be a visionary and you can have this power of seeing what is possible, of having these visions of like, all this amazing stuff that could happen, all this potential, all these things that could be brought to life, where things are going.
Yeah.
It's like you see where it is now, but you can sense this is going somewhere. It's going to be here in the future. And that can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And so people who are extroverted intuition are the kinds who can see a lot of what's going on around them or in the world and understand where it's going.
Yeah.
Or they might have this sense of the possibilities. Think of the possibilities that could happen. It's like, this would be a really cool thing that my friend group could do, or like this business idea, that could be a really good business idea, or like maybe buying this house would be a really good investment, or all these ideas of what could happen, what could be, and it's not so concrete.
Yes.
It's very theoretical.
Yeah.
And that's why it can be powerful. And like, wow, you have some vision. You can see, you're a prophet. You can see what's going to happen. But it can also have this sort of negative valence of like, you're not present. You're not paying attention to what's concrete. You're not paying attention to the facts. You're not here. You're off in some world of seeing the potential in things. And so you might have all these crazy ideas and you're trying all of them out. And then you don't stick with anything because you're not a very practical person. You're not a very concrete person. You're living in the future, or you're living in the theoretical. And so someone who is extroverted intuition can be the kind of person who has all these ideas and all these inspirations and maybe doesn't follow through with them.
Yes.
Gets bored of them quickly.
Yeah.
Or finds, this requires practical work. And I don't like
Boring.
the practical world. So I have a new idea. But combined with, some like virtuous qualities, it can be someone who like invests incredibly wisely, who builds something amazing, who can run a team of people and say, this is what we're building, and I can sense that it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Can't explain it right now, but I can lead us there.
Right.
And like powerful tech CEOs can be these kind of types where it's like they're building something that doesn't exist.
Extroverted intuitive has an incredibly inspiring, enigmatic quality to it.
Yeah.
Because the important thing to keep in mind, what makes this extroverted is that it needs a base in reality to jump off of. So what extroverted intuition is doing is the energy is flowing outward from the individual, looking into the environment, looking into people, looking into a situation, into, a business market, and suddenly being hit with this realm of possibility. And it's so deeply inspiring to them that they pour it outward. And many people will know what this vision is because the extroverted intuitive is wanting that to be spoken out into reality in some ways. They're not going to hold that intuition inside. People who are dominant extroverted intuitives tend to have quite an energetic personality, tend to really draw a lot of energy and individuals to them because they have that leader, visionary, inspiring quality, because they have these dynamic, really powerful ideas, but they really struggle to ground that into reality and to hold on for the long haul, because being extroverted, being about breadth, being about extending deeper or farther and farther into the intuitive possibilities means that the extroverted intuitive is following the inspiration. And when it kind of putters out, they're done with it. So this type can be known for its flightiness, for chasing one dream after the other, having all of these amazing ideas that inspire people, and yet nothing actually gets done. That's like the problem side of extroverted intuition, is that it can't anchor, it can't organize well. It doesn't want to focus on making all of these things happen. It just wants to be like running at the front of the helm saying, let's do this, let's do that. And then jumping onto the next ship and saying, let's do this, let's do that.
Yeah.
So it's, when utilized properly, can really create and generate something incredible. But there are some very interesting pitfalls to this type. Something that you have to be careful of is being overwhelmed by the inspirations. I think that's something that I've heard from individuals who have this as both a first or second function, is that you become almost in what is it called? Like analysis paralysis. You're just like,
Yeah.
like you're stuck kind of like, what do you actually do now?
Right.
There's all of these different possibilities. It's almost like there's an explosion of ideas sometimes is what
Yeah.
extroverted intuition called NE. So it'll be a little bit easier. What NE
Yeah.
feels like, this explosion of possibility, and all of that energy can sometimes make it really difficult to know which path should I actually follow, or maybe just feeling overwhelmed by all of the different possibilities in front of you.
Right. If you're someone who's creative, definitely, and you're committed to your craft, or at least you've tried, dabbled in a lot of creative projects, you could understand how being NE, extrovert intuition, could result in just ideas and ideas and ideas and ideas, and you can be overwhelmed, as you're saying, overwhelmed by the ideas. How do I make them practical reality?
Mm-hmm.
How do I do the work that brings them into fruition? Because you have so many ideas. And that's being creative can be the challenge of somehow discarding all these ideas you're having in favor of doing the actual practical work.
Yeah.
And finding that balance of like, okay, I'm like, got all these crazy plans, all these crazy visions, but I have to choose one. And that's like why an NE can be so powerful if they're also paired with someone who's very practical.
Yes.
It's like you've got the visions, I've got the means. Like together we can make lots of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a good segue into introverted intuition, because while the NE function goes for that expansion, the NI, introverted intuitive function, is going for depth, and it wants to condense all of those potentials, the patterns it senses. It's almost like it's building these internal systems of patterns and possibilities that grow more deeply over time and get stronger and stronger based on all of this implicit information, symbolic understanding, and it's getting strengthened and it's starting to take shape and it's going to form. And every time it's kind of going out into the world, it might be taking things in, yet that's being funneled into that internal system of possibility that's leading to this incredible ability to see into a possibility, to have an intuition, to have a vision, yet then to have it actually be organized enough for it to come alive.
Yeah. The label slapped on this is the dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think dreamer is a good descriptor because it doesn't necessarily evoke positivity or negativity. So someone who dreams, someone who can see these possibilities, someone who's lost in a kind of story, a kind of trajectory that often is very self-contained or concentrated or very deep. It's very self-referential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this idea of like, I have this vision, and what is it based on? It's based on, I don't know, the internal vision. I can feel it.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you paying attention to in the environment that's like telling you this is true? It's like, I'm not paying attention to the environment.
Yes.
I'm paying attention to my internal world.
Yes.
And the internal world tells me this is going to happen.
Yes.
And I am going to do it. And it's like,
Yeah.
what is that based on?
Yeah.
It's like, it's based on my intuition. This
Right.
very concentrated, sort of narrow, you might even say like, it can be kind of like tunnel vision sometimes
yes.
of like, I am fixated on this story that I am living, or that maybe we are living together, but like, this is where it's going.
Yeah.
Here's the tunnel we're traveling through.
Yeah.
Here's
Yeah.
the gateway we're walking through.
Yes.
That can be kind of sort of the dreamer. But you can understand how this could be negative as well as someone who is a dreamer. It's like, you're living in your dreams, man. It's like, you don't know what's real anymore, and you need to come back down to earth. You need to get realistic. You're caught up in your poetry or your art or your stupid podcast, and you need to come back down to reality because you're just like lost in dream world. You're like, you're such a romantic, you're such an artist, you're so aloof that like sometimes you like might go all day without even eating because you don't have that sensation of like here now, taking care of the here and now physical tangible, concrete stuff. I'm like lost in my dream and I forgot to eat today.
Yeah. And
because
you've
I'm
had
not
that
paying attention to my
dream
body.
for a long time.
Yeah.
It's nothing new.
Yeah.
That's what I think it really feels like. And it's hard to describe fully what the NI vision is, but it exists, as you said, inside. It's like this powerful internal image. While I think NE, of course, it feels like something that's kind of coming from them in a way, but still it's like the image really exists outside. It's like the NE individual saw the vision kind of pop up in the external environment and then is like, look at this, oh my God, this is so cool, everybody. And NI is just cultivating like this deep inner fire. And it's when you ask an NI person to describe why they have that vision or why they consider that this possibility is a truth, it's like, look, just trust me. Like Arran and I are both dominant introverted intuitives. So I think
We think.
Well,
We're pretty sure.
Yeah, we're pretty sure. Yeah. But I have these deep inner visions of what could be. And there's kind of some practical external data that's informing that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I've always been this way, that there's just this deep inner feeling of what's coming next or what should come next or what could be that's hard for me to pinpoint step by step why that's going to happen or if it will, but there's just that deep inner sense, the driving force. And it's always something I feel is very real, very imbued with meaning and this like deep beauty and truth, and is not something I want to hold for myself. Often it has to do with almost like the becoming of myself and the becoming of others, or even like the kind of beauty and potential that I see sort of interwoven in each individual's being. That's part of that own just intuitive potential that I think just exists everywhere.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to really explain why I think those things or why I intuit those things, but it's unshakable.
Yeah. And again, there can be kind of that perception that if you are an NI person, that others are also NI. And so some, not all, but some NI types, introverted intuition types, they might be fascinated with self-improvement or like getting somewhere or becoming. It might be that they have this sort of individuation instinct in some sense. And that sounds like, really positive thing. Like that's really great, but it could also be kind of like you might be overly fixated on this idea of like becoming. And you might see others also as like, you can become, and you can become, and you can become. So that's sort of like this introverted aspect can also kind of have this sort of individualistic aspect as well. It's like NE is like the world can become, these projects can become, the business can become,
the group can become.
But NI is a little more like I can become, and you can become, and you can become, and like you should reach your full potential, and you should reach your full potential. And that can be kind of a powerful thing.
Yes,
you can be someone who heals and lifts people up, but it can also be, something that you overly fixate on, which is like, you're not reaching your potential.
Yes.
And that can be, a problem.
Yeah, because people don't exist in a reality of potential, or at least in a sense of potential defined in this way. And I think that's been a point of tension, but also a real cornerstone and defining quality of the work that you and I do. It's like what inspires us is who you could become.
Yeah.
The version of yourself that's unfolding in front of you and supporting that. And NI's got a real sense of what that is and an ability to cultivate it in a way that's heavy but deeply meaningful.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of time left. I think it might be fun to just kind of like try and play with some examples of these four types interacting.
Okay.
We didn't talk about this, but we've talked about it in the past, and we can argue about this a little bit because we might not agree. But the idea of four different people with, let's say, they're sort of defined by these four functions. They're
in a
primary,
very stereotypical
in a very
way.
extreme, very unrealistic way.
Yeah.
But they're all at an art show, and they're looking at a painting.
Yeah.
Each one of them walks by a painting. And they have four different responses based on their functions, based on their function attitudes, excuse me. So NE, extroverted intuition. Yeah. They pick up on sort of the style of the painting. They envision like where the painting might go, how it might have became, what the artist might have done. They could see how a friend might come to see the painting and learn something, or maybe how the painting might be purchased and placed somewhere where it could have the greatest artistic effect on people.
I could also see this type being like, imagine this. You get on Etsy, you start putting your paintings up, like, like painting the vision of the art business for
That's
their
good.
friend.
Yeah.
Just like, imagine how we could like create this thing. And the person's like, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to put my art up in this gallery. And they're like, no. Like, we'll get you up on,
Sure.
at this gallery. And just like all of these interesting ideas, just like flowing. And it's like one idea. It's like, but wait, which one? It's like, I don't know any of them. It doesn't matter. Any is just like that explosion of possibility kind of flowing from what they picked up in the picture, in the art.
Yeah. Okay. Introverted intuition. They walk past the painting and it evokes a story to them. They kind of get lost in the world of the painting, almost like they're walking through a gateway. And they begin to sort of envision, what does the painting mean? What is the sort of the energy that it's sort of evoking?
Right.
Where is it going? What is the sort of story of the painter? And what were they thinking as they made this?
Yeah.
And like, what was the next painting they did, and the next painting after that? And there's kind of like this narrow sort of traveling through a gateway kind of thing, of looking deeply into the painting and sort of evoking all this sort of magic and story from it.
Yeah, and also maybe even getting their own kind of images or symbols of like connecting, where the painter was at that time and what they were experiencing to this greater dynamic, interesting story.
All right, extroverted sensing, they walk past the painting and they focus on the colors, the textures. They focus on the brush strokes themselves.
Yeah.
They're very interested in what were the concrete steps or motions that created the painting. They might walk closer and they like look at the individual brush strokes and they're like, interesting. And maybe they sort of think about, how did they get these colors? What's the style here?
Is it acrylic paint?
Is it, what kind of paint is it? What's the canvas like? How big is the canvas? All kinds of very concrete, tangible things you can touch and see about the painting, as opposed to maybe like the deeper meaning or the evoked story of getting lost in the painting, like the intuition might, the intuitive might happen. All right, introverted sensation. So this person walks past the painting and they suddenly feel reminded of something from their past, or it brings up a feeling of like, I remember the last time I looked at a painting, or the last time I was at an art show.
Yeah.
And they kind of enjoy that pleasant feeling of like, art, like that's nice. Or maybe the painting is of like a couple, like in a field, and they're reminded of like their relationship, or maybe there's some pain there of like, like my like girlfriend, she left me, and like now I'm like sort of thinking about like that, and there's sort of this kind of nostalgic, this kind of very sensation oriented, the kind of like feelings of like warmth and pleasantness or sort of coldness associated with the painting. They're not really walking through it on like a magical journey as much as they're kind of being brought back to their internal world over and over and over again.
Yeah, in a very embodied way. They might even recall those sensations that were tied to that time, or that my mother was wearing this when that happened, and it reminds me of that, and they're just sort of taken back to that space.
All right, here's another example. This is these types, they're creating a painting themselves. They're actually attempting to paint.
Okay.
Extroverted intuition. They're attempting something sort of innovative, or new, or revolutionary with painting.
Just like, be like really weird.
I'm going to try like this new style.
I'm going to paint with my toes.
Like, I'll paint with my toes. or like only body parts used to paint with, like no
Only
paintbrushes.
my elbows dipped in
Right.
paint.
It's like, this will be interesting. No one's ever done this before. Like, think of the new style, the new fad that could be created by doing this. All right, Introverted Intuition and I, maybe they paint something that's very romantic, something that like they think of some story that they find very compelling, and they just sort of paint, and they just sort of maybe feel it out. They sort of intuit some sort of some magical symbol, or maybe some sort of like mythological feeling, scene of some kind, or maybe something like very abstract and weird, but like it feels like very powerful to them.
Yeah.
That they're making. Maybe they're not focusing on how it's being done or like the style of it, as much as they're just sort of like intuiting, you could say, something.
Or also maybe even like trying to impart a kind of energy with the painting itself. I don't know how to explain this, but like I feel like the art of the introverted intuitive is often trying to evoke that story which is deep within them, or that symbol which is deep within them, so that it invokes it in other people too. So they might be trying to just tap into that depth of space and bring up that own internal story, that symbolic beauty, and kind of paint it out.
All right, Extroverted Sensation. They paint something that's photorealistic.
Yeah.
They see something to the side. Maybe it's like a dog or like a barn or a tree. And they're like, I'm going to try and paint that as realistically as possible.
Yes.
And so they're like very focused on like a concrete object around them. And it's like, well, that's what art is, right? You just copy reality or some sense, or take something that you can see, and that's what you put on paper. And you try to make it like very concrete. It's not very abstract. It's not very impressionistic. It's just like very tangible.
Yes.
All right. Introverted Sensation. Maybe this is someone who paints how they know. They're just very familiar with one way of painting, and maybe they've painted many times before, and they have one way that they like to paint. Or maybe they only paint an apple, and they just paint apples over and over and over again.
I could also see the introverted sensation type painting something realistic, like the barn, but there seems to be this notion that when you look at it, like it's through a different lens. Like it's not reality as it is. It's almost like a distortion of reality, or maybe like it looks so realistic, but like the colors are kind of in an interesting way, or that the angle of it, you know what I mean? Like looking at reality through this different lens rather than SE wanting it to be like the actual photo itself. So SI kind of taking in that practical, concrete information, but showing it through their own impression.
Okay, well, those examples may or may not be helpful. I'm not sure if Alyssa even agrees with them. She's kind of giving me this weird eye as we go over these. Dr. John Beebe will be at the STOA speaking with us on February 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a free event. He will talk much more. Well, he doesn't have much time, but still, he's an expert on this. We're not. And so he's going to get into his 8-function model on typology, and it should be really interesting. So you can RSVP at thestoa.ca. It's free, and we hope to see you there. If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/goldenshadow.org.
Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Head over to goldenshadow.org to submit your dream for possible interpretation on a future episode.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time.